This week's lecture will look at how to use database in our web applications to store data at the back end. So in this way, I will start talking about the database APIs and how you can manage your MySQL database to create the connections and access MySQL in PHP. And we also will go through some of the simple codes to let you clear with the 5 main steps to connect to the database and how we can retrieve, add a new record, update and delete a record from the database. When we in PHP, if we are using MySQL as a database, we will connect the database through APIs. For MySQL, there are 3 different types of APIs. The first one, MySQL extensions. This is actually the original extension used by PHP, but now this has been replaced by MySQLi extension. When you write MySQL extension, there are 2 approaches that you can apply. You can write it using the procedural approach. We can also write it using object-oriented approach. That means that we define objects to store the database connections, and we will see the sample codes for the different approach. The last one, PHP data objects. If you haven't decided whether you will change your database from MySQL to other database management system, for example, maybe you might want to change to SQLite, Oracle. If that's the case, PHP data objects, PDOs, will be a better option for you. So in our web applications, if we want to deal with not only MySQL, but we also want our code can be used for any database, then PDOs is the better option. But if you are only using MySQL, so you can use MySQLi extension, writing it using procedural approach or object-oriented approach. So when we want to decide on database, one of the important thing is you have to think about whether you want to create a database independent PHP code or not. If yes, then go for PDO approach. Next, we'll look at how to manage MySQL database. This is what we will cover in this course. So this is just a sample how we can write the MySQL statements. These are if we want to access MySQL using the command line interface, you can the commands, SQL commands that you have learned in your database class can be applied in the CLI. So these are the common commands that you can use for MySQL command line sessions. So, but for this course, later I will show you how to use the PHPMyAdmin as a database management system, which provide the UI to help us to quickly manage our database. So later I will show you the system part. So this is the one that we are going to use, PHPMyAdmin. I will show demo to you in this video to show you how to use it. For those students that have installed MySQL Workbench, you can also refer to their guidelines to learn how to use it. So basically, the concept will be similar, but this is just a separate system Workbench that you can use to manage your MySQL database. If you install them, by default, we will use PHPMyAdmin to manage our database. Access MySQL database in PHP, there are 5 main steps. The first one is to connect to the database. So this is the most important one. We have to check we have to connect to the database, and also define later we will see what are the important informations that we need to have in order to connect to the database successfully. So to check the connections, the second step is we will check our code should also allow to handle the connection errors. So if we fail to connect to the database, we'll prompt the users to let them know about it. The third one, execute the SQL query. So it depends on the purpose of the code. If the code is to retrieve some information, then we will use the select statement. If you are adding a new record in your program, you will use the insert statement. If you are going to edit the data, you will use the update statement. If you are going to delete a record from the database, then you have to use the delete SQL statement. So when we write, in the third step 3, we will write the SQL statement that we are going to use, and we also will learn how to execute the SQL query using PHP codes. Last thing, the information, let's say if you are retrieving the data from the database table, we process the results that we receive from the database and to meet the purpose of our program. So lastly, after we have finished using all the SQL statements, executing and also process the result, and no longer needed the database connections, we will free the resources and close the database connection. So these are 5 main steps that you need to remember when you want to use a database in PHP, and how we can access and how we can execute and process the data retrieved from the database. This is a very simple code to demonstrate the 5 steps to you. So if you look at this, is actually a try. We are written it using the try catch, because this will help us to handle the error. So from this part, if you look at the number 1, this part of code basically refer to the first step, the step 1. The step 1 is to connect to the database. If you look at this, is an example of code that we have written using the PDO approach, using the PHP data objects approach. That means you are free to use any database. You have to specify the connection string, which cover the host name, the database name, the host name, and the database name. You also have to specify the user and password that we have created, and they have the rights to access this database and table. So we will define PDO objects to create the new connection object. So from there we will set attribute, and also in order to capture the errors. So the first part basically is the sample PDO code that will help us for the first step, connect the database. The second step, this is the catch part, basically will help us to catch the error. If let's say when we try to connect to the database, it doesn't work, the message will be retrieved based on what kind of error that they have what kind of exceptions that we have retrieved from the connections. So this is step 1. This is step 2, handle connection error. Step 3. Step 3, we want to execute the SQL query. So from this code, we can see that we have defined a variable, which is a string that store the SQL statement that will help us to do the things that we want. What is the main purpose? Like for example, in this case, the SQL query is a select statement, which will help us to retrieve all the records from categories table ordered by the category name. So once we have when we execute it, so in this is the statement, the query, the PDO point, this is actually the code that we will write to execute the query. So this using the default method, query method, we will run this SQL statement, and the result that we retrieve we store in this result array. So the next thing, we will process the result. So the result that we process, we normally for web applications at the back end, we will do the processing, and we will send based on the request from the user. So after we process the request, we will respond to the request. So Number 4 basically will focus on how we process the result in order to respond to the request. So in this example, we can see that we have retrieved the records from the database, from database table categories, and all the records from categories we have fetched. We will use a while loop to print the ID of each record and also the category name. So we will from this we can see that we retrieve all the records from categories, and each record consists of ID and also category name. So we will echo these two informations, the ID and also category name. So remember, when we retrieve the records, it may be more than one item. So this result will be an array. So we will always use a loop to loop through the result. So this is, we will use the fetch method to fetch the result. So we will go through each row of the result and store it under the row variables and print each row of the record. So this is this is relevant to step 4, process the result based on the needs, based on how we want to respond to the request. So lastly, for PDO, when you want to release the resources and close the connections, you point the PDO object, the database. This is the object that we have defined to open the connections. So we will set it to now in order to free resources and close the connections, since it is an object. So this is just a very simple code to demonstrate to you that in the code actually it consists of 5 steps. Connect to the database, handle the connection error, execute the SQL query, process the result, and lastly, free resources and close the connection. So these are the 5 main steps. As long as you are clear with these 5 main steps, it's very easy for you to write the code. So basically, normally 1, 2, and 5 are fixed. 3 and 4 depends on the request from the user, and we will execute the query. Depends on whether we want to retrieve. There are 4 main actions that we can do in the database. The CRUD actions is either we want to create a new record, read record from database, update record, or delete record from the database. So now I will go through the coding part to show you how you can to go through the different approaches that you can apply to write the code. So we have using the 3 different APIs. So you remember for MySQLi, we have the procedural approach, and later, so first I will demonstrate to you how to use the MySQL procedural approach using the and also how to write the prepared statements, and lastly, we also go through the code for the PDO. So when you download the source code, if you have downloaded the source code, you will see that there are a few folders inside the source code. So for the demonstration purpose, to explain the code to you, we will go through the CRUD folder underscore MySQLi folder. So if you look at the README file, right, basically I will put some basic information here to tell you what is what the code is about. So for the CRUD, these 3 folders, right, we will cover the how to create a new record, how to read records, how to update records, and also delete records from the MySQL database. So what are the coding that what are the 5 steps, the codes of the 5 steps that we have discussed just now. So all the codes that we will see here is based on these 5 steps, but just using different API. So for this one, later we will look at how we can. The codes actually is similar codes, but we just write it using the MySQLi prepared statements. The last one is the PDO. So the codes, how we write it in the using the PHP data objects. So these are the 3 folders. Later I will I will go through the codes that I explained to you again to make sure that you have the right ideas how the code should be written. So first, before after you download the sample codes, right, one of the important thing is you need to set up the database before you can run and compile the sample codes. The most important thing is you need to know how to set up the database. So if you inside the folder, you will see that there will be a file with the extensions, the .sql extension. The file set with the .sql extensions consists of the database informations, and also the SQL statement to create a new database. So if you open this, so this is the SQL statements that I have prepared for you in the sample code so that you can set up the database quickly. So if you look at in this example, we need to create a in order for you to run these 3 sample codes, you need to set up a database with the name test and also create a table called users. So this users table will have a ID which will do the auto increment. That means they will automatically, every time we add a new record into it, it will start the counter, or they will add one number into it. So it will, by default, it will start from number 1, and when we add another new record, will be number 2. The ID will change to number 2. So this I have set it to auto increment, and we have another 3 attributes in this table: name, age, and email. The primary key will be the ID. So if you come to phpMyAdmin, so in this is the interface of phpMyAdmin. Before you use it, remember to start the don't forget to start your Xen. So you have to go to your Xen control panel. So for you to use the database, remember not only start the Apache, you also have to start your MySQL. So if you didn't start right, you will not be able to connect to the phpMyAdmin. So now I just stopped the database. You can see that I'm not able to connect to the database now. When I click start, it is running now, and I refresh again. I will be able to access to the phpMyAdmin again. So for those who have not used phpMyAdmin before, you can, if you click localhost, you will come to the main page of the Xen, and if there is a link for you to access to the phpMyAdmin. So if you click the last button to come to phpMyAdmin, this is the UI that you will see. So basically, before you can execute the sample code, there is one thing that you need to do. You have to create the database table. So you can either run the command to create the database, or if you want to use the UI, you can click the new button and add the database name. So you have to create the database using the same name like what we'll use in our config file. If not, it will not be running. So this is the name of the database that we are going to use. So you must create the exact same name in order to execute the sample code. The database name is test. You can create one. So now you can see that we have one new database, and if you click here, you will come to this database. If you click the name of the database, you can come to this database. So to create the table, you can use the SQL statement that I already prepared for you. Just Control C, and you can come to the console side and paste it here. So for us to execute the query, you have to press Control Enter. In order to run the query or execute the query, you have to press Control Enter. So now I have executed it, and you can see that there is a new table appear here. With now it is still an empty table without any record, but we already created it. The next thing, besides creating the database and table, there is another thing that is needed. So after you have created the database and also the table, and the second thing that you need to do is to create the user account for the database, to access the database, and to give rights, to give the user to create a new user with the username and the password that I have defined in the config file. So if you have to use the right username. So in order for you to run these three codes, you have to create the user with the same name and same password. If not, you can't access to this database, the test database that we just created here. So we already created this, but now you also need to create a user that I have already specified in the code. We need a user with the username user1, and the password for the user to access this database is user1 abc. So for us to create a new users, so if we can create, it is important for us to create users to give the access. So you can click the privileges. If you scroll down, you can either use SQL statement, or you can, if you use PHP admin, and in this video I will show you how you can use PHP admin to add new user account. You have to go to privileges and scroll down to come to the new button. You can see the new here. Click the add user account. For username, remember you have to use the exact same name, user1, and the password user1 abc. User1 abc. You can choose any host or local. So if you want to just stick to local host, then you can put local host, or if you any host also can use, you choose this also can. So now if I stick to local host, which is same as the one that I've defined in the database, in the database connection code. So we need to retype the password again, user1 abc. So for this, I will check all for the privileges, because I want to give this user all the rights to do all the admin's rights. But if you only want to allow them to do certain actions for your own program, if you only want to give specific privileges rights, you don't need to check all. You just give them the privilege, the access that they need. So for these demonstrations, I will check all, so that I give the full admin access for this user1. So after you have choose the privileges, you click go. You come to this button, the go button, and click it. A new user account, user1, has been created, which has access to the test database. So now we already ready with the database and also the user information. If we come back to the code. So before I look at the config files, now we already settled the database. I'll close this, the README file, so I'll close it. So we just remind you again for the 5 steps. Okay, so the first thing, we need to connect to the database. In the simple codes, we have created a new file called config.php, and these files only store the codes, PHP codes, that will allow us to handle the step 1 and step 2. That means we will write the codes that required to help us to connect to the database using MySQLi API. So this is the sample for CRUD MySQLi. So we will use the MySQLi API to do the database connection. So for the config files, remember we have to use the method that related to the API. So in this, this is the example for MySQLi. For any config file, there are four main informations that we must have. We need to have the what is the database host, the name of the database, the username, and also password. So in this, since we have set up this as a localhost server, so with the this is the name of our server will be localhost. And the database name that we just created is test, and the user that we just created that have access to this database is user1 with the password user1 abc. So these are the four variables that we can define to store each of these database information. So this is for the database config file. So this config file handle the step 1 and step 2. To connect it, you need these four information: the host, database host, the database name, username, and password. For MySQLi procedural approach, we will use MySQLi connect. So this is the functions that will help us to open a new connection to the MySQL server. We pass in the four information and we store it in this variable. So this if statements will help us to do for the step 2. So for us to do the connections and check whether the connections has any error or not. If let's say we fail to connect to the database, it will show us prompt us this message, database connection failed, and also the error code. So this is the step 1 and step 2. This is the step 2. So if let's say you are using the MySQL object-oriented approach, okay, so this is basically this is just the code that we have written, and sometimes I comment the part which is the part that actually it will be the same thing but written using the object-oriented approach. So you will see that the one that I didn't comment will be the procedural approach, but I also include the codes related to object-oriented approach, but I comment it. So you can actually look at the two different formats, but now we will focus on the procedural approach. So if you see any things that I have put MySQL object-oriented approach, that means this, if you uncomment it, you can write it using the object-oriented approach. Okay, so for procedural approach, the database informations will always be the same for all the APIs that you use, no matter you are using a procedural approach or object-oriented, but just the function will be different. So if you see, if you will use procedural approach, this is a function that we will use. If you are using object-oriented approach, you will write it by creating a new MySQLi object, but by passing in these four. So this will be a new object which store the MySQLi connection. So this will be the one that help us, the step 2 help us to check the error. So it is actually the same thing, but the only difference is this is the object-oriented approach. This is the functions that we use in the MySQLi procedural approach. So when you see the comments part, actually is exactly the same thing. You can choose to use procedural or object-oriented. So this is just to I add in extra codes just to give you as an example for object-oriented approach as well. So when you to test whether the config file is working or not, you can I have added this echo to print this message. If the database is connected successfully, this will be printed. But if there is any error, this will be printed. So this is the sample config file for this that you can see in this folder. So once we have this ready, that means we already have the step 1 and step 2, the code for step 1 and step 2 ready to be used. But in your project, of course, you don't need this line, because normally we won't show to the user the database connected successfully or not. This can be, you can normally this will be printed in the log, in your own log file. If let's say you have any log file that you use for troubleshooting, this will be printed in your log file for troubleshooting. Okay, so far this is for step 1 and step 2 for index. So if you open the index file, this index file this is the first page that you will see when will be the first page for this program. So if you open the localhost and you can go to the So this is the folders that consists of the PHP programs. Now we are looking at this group MySQLi. So this is the index page that we will see when I click the folder. This is the first page. Okay, now at the moment in the index file you can see that this is the echo statement that I just showed you in the config file, to show that the database connected successfully. We didn't see, and it is supposed to be a table that will retrieve all the information from the database, but at the moment we only have an empty table. So the index page, the home page is empty without anything in this table. Only have the table with the name of each record. Okay, for the name of the attribute. So for us to add a new user record, we can click the add new data link. So before I go into this, I just go through the simple the index file, the source code for index file. So since we in the home page, we will connect to the database in order to retrieve all the records from the database table, the users table. Since we are going to retrieve all the information, so from the first page, index page, we already need to include the configuration file to start the database connection, because this index.php already have to connect to the database to retrieve all the records, user records. So if you see, for we already have a separate file handling the step 1 and step 2. So in other pages that require database, you just need to include the config file. So you can use this function include once statement and to include the file, the config file here. So this will help us to include the codes, the step 1 and step 2 code in any PHP files that require the database connection. So next, we will be focusing on the step 3, execute the SQL query. So in this home page, what we need is we want to retrieve all the records from the users table. So the SQL, this is the SQL statement. This is the SQL statement that we have defined, and in this example, I straight away store the result by executing the query. So this is the functions that we will use to execute the query. So this will be the one performs query on the database, and the result that from the query we store in this array, the result array. So we pass in the database connection. So remember, this is the MySQLi. So the name that you put here must be exactly same as the name that you use here, the variable names that you use here to store the database connection. Okay, so you must use the exact same name. Because a lot of times that students when they write it for their own program, they reuse my config file, but they have actually changed sometimes they write their own config file. They already changed the name, but they forgot to change it here. So this must be exactly same as the variable here. Even if you change the name, you must make sure that the name will be consistent. And this is this string represent the SQL statement. So we execute it by passing the database variable, the connection variable, and also the SQL statement. So this function will help us to execute the query on the database, and the result will be stored here. So this is the HTML code. So we can see we already see the add new data link, which will when I click this link, we will go to add.html. So later we will see this file. So this will be this is a table. So in this table, this is the table row that shows all the name of the attributes. And this is also part of this is the step 4. After we have executed the query, step 3, step 4 is process the result based on the purpose, how you want to respond to the request. Now, in this index.php, the request is to retrieve all the records from user table. So we already execute it, and now we have to process the result, all the records that we retrieve from the user database. We want to, this is a while loop. This is a while loop that we use the MySQLi fetch array function. So this is the functions that will allow us to fetch a result row as an associative, a numeric array, or both. So we pass in the result variable here, and this will allow us to go through one by one. And we also define one variable to store each record one by one. We will look through each of the record in this array, result array, and we want to print the age, name, age, email of this. And you can also see that the last one, right? If you when I added the new record, you will be able to see this. We will have an edit and delete button here to allow the users to edit the record or delete a record. So if you can see, this is actually an anchor tag, but we have this. Do you notice here? We have a question mark ID equals to the ID that we have retrieved for each of the record. So remember, in this database, we have 4 attributes: ID, name, age, and email. The one that we are going to print to the users to see in our UI is name, age, and email. But now later you will also see that we will also show them an edit link, and also a edit link which is work as the clickable link to allow the users to go to the edit.php. This will be when the user click edit link, they will go to edit.php by passing the ID of this record, so that we can do the editing and make changes to the record, and we will know which record we are going to access. This ID is the primary key. So if you remember last week when we learned the form processing, the question mark actually represent the get method. So this will be the edit link, and we also have a delete link, which will allow us to navigate to the delete.php. So this will be the code that will show us how to delete a record. So when on click, you can see that there is actually also, when the user click the delete button, this is actually the DOM JavaScript statement to print which will have a confirmation message to ask the user, are you sure you want to delete? If they click yes to proceed, we will we will bring the ID to the delete.php, and also allow the users to delete the record. So this is what later when I add a new record, you will be able to see after the name, age, and email, you will see two links, edit link and also delete link. But actually, we also pass the ID. So lastly, after we have do the process the result, the last step is close the connection. For PHP MySQL procedural approach, we use MySQLi underscore close. This is the functions for us to close the database connection. So you when you do for your own assignment, right, you have to discuss with your group member which approach you want to use. Are you going to use MySQLi or PDO? If you are using MySQLi, you also need to have the agreement that you will use procedural approach or object-oriented approach. So now, okay, so this is the add.html file, the page that is going to allow us to. This is going. You later will see this will be a form that allow us to add the name, age, and email, and also you will see a submit button. Now I will go to this page, and I click the add new data button and add new data link. This will will bring us to the add.html page. So now I will add a new record. We're adding a new record. And in here, they also shows that data added successfully. So this is, now we will look at the add.php so that you later I will go through, quickly go to the add.php so that you will see the how we write it to the step, how we write the code for step 3 and step 4 to add a new record to database. So this is the message that to show us that the data added successfully. If you click here again to refresh it, you can see the new record has been added. This is the one that we already see it. And now if we come to the code, so basically any files that you need to use the database connection, remember to include this. So all the codes that require us to write PHP, don't forget your opening tag of the PHP and also the closing tag of your PHP. So if you scared that you will be confused, you can add some comments to remind yourself. So inside, this is the normal HTML code, and now I have included the PHP, embed the PHP code here. So for to connect to the database, again we include the config file, and this is the validation code just to check whether there are any. If you see we have used a new function here, this is the one that will help us to check whether there are any escape special character or not used in this statement or not. But you can omit this at the moment if you are not going to use it. You can just define the variable and store the input from the form. So remember, you have to check whether they are using which method. So in the form, we are using the post method, and this is the name which shows the key that will be used to store the user input, email, age, and name. So that's why since we are using the post method, we have to use the super global array name post followed by the name of the key. So these are and we define 3 variables to store the input from the user. So if you feel this is confusing, you don't want the validation code, then you can remove it by just keeping this. Okay, so this is all the things that you have seen here. These are more like additional one to do the checking for us. So this is the code that will help us to check whether is there any empty data has been sent to us. If it is empty, so this is the empty functions that will help us to check whether it's any empty variable. So if there's any empty variable, they will show the echo the sum to indicate that the name is empty, the age is empty, the email is empty. If nothing is empty, we will continue to step 3 and step 4. Step 3, so again, this will be the same one. We will use the MySQL query to execute our SQL statement. So as it is exactly same like the previous one, the only difference is we have to change the statement. So in this case, since we are adding a new record, so we need to use the insert statement. Don't forget your database table name and the attribute name. The values, we have to pass in the variable that store the user input that pass to the backend using the post method. So these are the 3 variables. So we insert into users, this name must be same as your database name, database attribute name, the table name. So now we have the attribute name, age, and email in our table here. So when you write your SQL statement, this must be exactly same as the table attribute name. And this one, the values here, the values that you pass in, this is okay. We have passed in the in this case, we must use the same variable name that we have stored the user input. So this is the insert statement, and don't forget the connection variable from the config file. So this is step 3. We execute the insert query to allow us to add a new record to the users table, and we store the result here. And next, in the step 4, process the result. So in this case, I want to print a statement to inform the users that the data added successfully. So this is what you have seen here, data added successfully. And I also added a link to allow us to navigate back to the home page, the index.php. So now if I click view result, we will go back to the previous page, the home page. And now you will be able to see that we already have a new record added here, which is same as what we have stored in the database, because this retrieved from the database. We already see this index.php just now, the code. And this is the one that we retrieved from the database. We also have the edit and delete link here. So when I click edit here, the ID, the unique ID, ID1, will be passed to the edit.php. You can see from here. When I click edit, we will go to edit.php, and in the code we have embed to use the get method to pass the ID to edit.php. So you can this ID equals to 1 is the unique ID, the primary key for this record. ID1, ID equals to 1. So we will know which record we want to retrieve, and also echo here. So this is the reason why we need to have the unique ID. We need to know the ID of the record in order to retrieve it and put it here. So now you can see I already have the data which I retrieved from the database and put in these text boxes. This is actually a form. So when I make any changes here and click update button, we will execute the update statement. Now we go to the edit.php file to have a look at the code. When we come to edit.php, again, these PHP codes also require database, so don't forget to include the config file. So any file that you need to have a database connection must include the config.php. So this is the isSet statement to check whether this if the post method is update. So you can see from the previous, from the index.php. Okay, so this is now we are going to do the update update. So this is the same things that we have seen in the previous code. So if nothing is empty and all these variables we already all these variables is exist and no as we already do the checking, no empty. If there is no empty fields, we will go to execute the SQL query. This is the since it is to edit a record, so we will have to update. Okay, so we will see that we have an update statement here, and to update we have to put in the right table name and set. When we set right, this will be the name that we have used in the database table. Name, age, and email. So if you use different name, right, you must follow the one that you use in your database table. So this will be the variable name that we have stored, we have defined. So you can see here we have actually passed in the ID name, we have four values here, which we will actually we retrieve from this form. Okay, so this once the user click the update button, so let's say now I change it to 35 and I change this to jumpabc@gmail.com. So I have made two changes, and when I click update button, you can see that this record has changed to this has changed to 35, and this jumpabc has changed to jumpabc. Because I just edited the record. So this is the form that you have seen just now. Okay, from the index, we have go back to the when we are at the index.php file, we have actually, but once the user click the edit button, edit link, we come to edit.php, we will pass this is the part that will be first executed before we execute the update statement. So this will only be executed when the update button is clicked. So this is, they will check. So this will not be executed if the form has not been, the update button has not been clicked. So you can see we have when I click edit, this is the update button. So when we come to edit.php file, the first thing that will be executed is this part of code. So when we come to the edit.php, there is, remember, the question mark represent the get method. You see a question mark here, right? And when we come here also, you can see this is actually the get method. So we know we are using get, the method equals to get. So when we want to retrieve the ID, we have to use the super global. We will use the super global get method to retrieve the ID, and I store it in a new variable called ID. And we execute the result to retrieve this particular record. Select all the data for these users where ID equals to this variable ID. So now, since we are passing in we want to change the first record ID equals to 1, so this will be equivalent to 1, which is passed to the ID passed to the backend. So the first record will be the one that will be retrieved. So this is the same statement, the while loop, that will help us to fetch the name, age, and email from the database for this particular record. And what I have done is actually this is a form. So I use this form this is actually an important part for edit. A lot of times students forgot to add in the value from the database. So we have already, when we do the edit, right, remember to pass the ID to the database in order for us to do the processing and retrieve the right record. Now we will be able to retrieve the information for user ID equals to 1. And the name, the age, and email for this particular user will be retrieved, and we will echo the value in the text input. So you can, that's the reason why you can see that the Cham Aming, the name Cham Aming, the age 35, and the email address appear here. If you didn't echo this will be empty. So we will, in order for user to make the right changes, we must first show them what they already have in the database. So when they make the changes and click the update button, all the we will pass all this value to the first code, the update code, to do the processing. So now if you see here, we already have in this form, we have a text input for the name, another text input for age, another text input for email. So these are the 3 things that we already have. So after you make the changes, and you can also this is another thing that you will see here. We also have a hidden input here, the type equals to hidden, which we will use it in this form. We also want to send hidden data. And this hidden data, we send it using the get method. So we pass in the value. So this is the one that we have just retrieved from the previous one, from that we have received from index when we click the edit. Okay, so when we click the update button, right, we pass not only the name, age, and email, but also the ID, which is a hidden type of input. So this will allow us to have the ID for to write the SQL statement in order to correct the right record in the database. So now if we look at this code, we will see that we have 4 input here: ID, name, age, and email, which has passed from this form at the bottom. So when the user click the update button, these 4 things, ID is the hidden data. Name, age, and email will be the one that the user can make the changes. So we will execute the update query. And you can, if you see here, once I make the changes, we'll redirect back to the index page. So this is this one that we also have a header code here. This is just to redirect to the display page in case if the user don't want to do anything, they just want to go back to the home page. So if you see when I click edit, there's a home link here to allow them to go back to home page if they decided not to make any changes. So this is, lastly, don't forget to close your connection again. So this is for edit. Now I add another new record. Okay, now if I click view result, we will see 2 records here. Okay, you can see this has been refreshed with the second record. Okay, the reason why the latest one appear here is because in my SQL statement, I order by ID in the descending order. So this is just let you know when in the file, in the code that we have written, right, we select all the records from user and sort by ID in descending order. That's the reason why the latest record will always appear here. So now I will show you, if let's say now we want to delete a record. When I click delete, it will show a confirmation message to us, are you sure you want to delete? And this is actually the one that you have, I have shown, this is the on-click event, which will return the user input, whether they choose OK or cancel. If they choose OK, we'll continue to the delete.php page. If we click cancel, nothing will be done. If I click OK, now you see we will delete the record. The record will be deleted. If we look at this page again, if the user click OK, we'll go to delete.php and we'll pass the ID using the get method. Now we'll look at the delete.php code. In delete.php code, again, to delete a record from database, we need to connect to the database first. So you need to include the config file again. And this is similar to the update edit.php. We also the previous in the request we have passed the ID, the user ID using the get method, and we store it in the ID variable. And this is the one that we the step 3, execute the SQL query, and this time our query is a delete statement. We want to delete from the user's table, and where the ID equals to the ID passed to the backend. So just now the ID equals to 2, so the second record will be removed from the database. And don't forget to pass in the MySQLi. This is the variables that we define to store the database connection. So we use the MySQLi query to execute this statement. And step 3 and step 4 here actually for processing the result. In this case, I redirect. I use the header functions to redirect to this page to the home page. The locations I indicate to redirect it to the home page in this case. So close the connection. So don't forget to free the resources and close the connection. So that's the reason why when I click delete, right, at the end they will you won't, because there is nothing that will be displayed in the delete.php. Instead of so after deleting the record, the program redirect us to the home page. So now if you go to the database and refresh it, you see the second record has been removed from the table already. So this is a very simple example to show you a very simple example to show you how you can have the add, edit, and delete. How you can write add, edit, and delete using PHP. So this is the examples MySQLi procedural approach. The next one that the next one, MySQL prepared statement, actually is similar things. The only difference is we will, instead of using the config file will be the same. So we will use the same config file. So this is the config file, the same one. Okay, add.php, the only difference is instead of we are writing a prepared statement. In the step 3, execute the other parts is the same like the previous example. The only difference is we write prepared statement to prepare the statement, bind the data into the statement, and also execute it. So when you write using the prepared statement, we can follow we have to follow these 3 steps. If you want to write your code, the execute query, the step 3 using prepared statement, these are the 3 main sub steps under here. So this is we will use the prepare function So this is will be the same MySQLi statement, the variables that we have defined in the config. So don't forget if you have used different variable name here, remember that in the code also you have to change your the variable's name. So this index part will be same, no different from the previous one. The only part that is different is I have shown you example in the add.php how to use the prepared statement. First, we prepare the statement. We use this prepare function. Okay, so this is actually the insert statement that you have seen before, but in the values, right? We use the question mark as a placeholder to represent the value. Then we bind the parameters here. We use the bind param method to bind the parameters. So this will be the placeholder. And in the prepared statement, when we use this, we have to specify the type of the input of the data values. So here we put SSS to represent the string. So if it is different one, you have to check. You can go to the PHP official website to check what are the data type that you can use for your data. If let's say it is integer, you have to use the other one. So now because these three are strings, so we will use SSS to represent the data type, and this is the variable name we pass in to show that this will be bind to the placeholder. The last one, we execute the prepared statement. So if you want to know more about the prepared statement, you can go to you can go to W3 School or the PHP manual to look at. So this is actually the features to execute the same or similar SQL repeatedly with high efficiency. So this is one of the purpose of the prepared statements to improve the efficiency. And you can also look at some, they also have the examples of the prepared statement. So basically, if you are written using prepared statement, you have to follow the way how the sub-steps how they write the prepared statements. Okay, it is similar in the example, but if you want to know some of the details in the theory part, you can go through these two websites. Okay, so if you see here, after since we will define a variable to store the prepared statement. So when you close it, when you do the freeze the resources and close connection, right, you also need to close this statement beside closing the connection. So normally in the previous example, right, if we are not writing using the prepared statement, we only need to close the database connection. But if we are writing using the prepared statement, we also need to close the statement, close the statement resources. So you remember, if you are writing using prepared statement, this is another additional step that you need to do. Same goes to edit.php. If you want to write it using prepared statement, don't forget the three sub-steps: prepare, bind, execute. So you can see it is the same update statement. The only thing different is we use the placeholder here in our prepared statement. In our SQL query, we will, instead of passing the variable straight away passing this, we use the placeholder. So this is we use the prepare function and pass in the SQL query, bind the parameter to these four data, and execute the statement. So these are the three substeps: prepare, bind, execute. Then redirect to the home page after we do the updating. Remember to close the statement beside closing the connection. For delete also, if you change to use, this one delete, don't need to, delete is the same, don't need to, there is nothing special for the prepared statement. So for, you can see in this example, we have rewrite the step 3 using prepared statement for add and edit.php. The other parts are exactly the same as the first example, except the add and edit part, which we rewrite using the prepared statement method. So the last example is the PDO example. For PDO example, first you can open the config file. The database we will still use the in this example this is the if you are writing using PDO, you want to be independent on the database, you can choose to use PDO API. So to use PDO API, they wrote it. This is actually is an object-oriented approach. So for PDO, right, you have to write in this format the connection string. Besides username and password, this will be same as the MySQLi, but for connection, right, you have to write a connection string using this format. You have to decide the name of the type of the database that you are going to use. Then you put this is the format. So if you see in this example, we use MySQL. So you have to put followed by the host equals to the host name, DB name equals to what? This is the default one. Host, DB name. You separate them using the semicolons. So this you must follow the right format. So later, if let's say your DB name is different, then you have to change the DB name here for your PDO connection. So this will be the same. And for PDO, we have to define a new PDO object, pass in the connection string in this format, and the database username and password. So if you look at the MySQLi statement, their config files will be different. They use the MySQL connect function, they pass in the 4 variables. But for PDO, you have to write the connection string, follow the format. And when we create the new PDO object, this is the new PDO object, we will pass in the connection string, database username and database password. And we also set to catch the error, we set the PDO error mode to exception. So this is, I just clean this to prove that we have to connect to database successfully. But for your own system, of course, we will hide this, and normally we will uncomment it or put it in the log file. So if there is any, this is for step 1, this is for step 2 to catch the error. So the only difference is we will use a different method in PDO. So this is the one we will use for to catch the exceptions. So we will catch the exception and store under the E variable and get the message and print it out, concatenate to the string that we have written here. So if there is any database connection error, the user will get what are the error message. What is the error message? To know what is the problem of the database connection. So this is the way how we write for PDO. For index, okay, now we look at index. Basically, the other parts will be same except you have to use PDO. This is the object, PDO object that we created to store the database connection. We will use query to execute. This is the method used to execute the SQL statement. This will be the step 3. Run the query and returns the PDO statement object. So the other parts will be exactly the same. The only difference is when we close it, right, since it is an object, we will point to the now to close the connection. So if we are going to, let's look at the edit.php. For edit.php, the other parts is the same. The only difference is this one I shows an example using the transaction. So if you look at the lecture notes, right, at the later part, in the lecture notes can see that there are some of the examples showing you that besides writing using the we can also have writing it using the transaction way. So this is the example to show you how you can use the transactions. So they are, you can search from the PHP manual for more information, the theoretical part. So far, this is the way we can also write it using a transaction. The good things about transaction is, let's say if you have, if there is any issues of the in our query, we can still roll back anything that we have done to undo to also reduce any issues of the database problem. So if we write using the transaction in the PDO way, in PDO, if you want to write it using the transaction, you start before when the step 3, you have to modify it to, instead of straight away execute the query, you have to begin the transaction first in order to start a database transaction. So we need to call this begin transaction function to start the transaction. So instead of it will allow us to start it as we can also have a set of queries. So if any of, because sometimes we not only do the retrieve, but we also have join this and that, a few SQL statements that you need to run. So if you have in this case, if there's any one of the query fields and we receive an exception, at least we can still roll back. It still allows us to roll back. So if you want to do it using the transactions, you can write it using the try catch approach. We have to call the begin transaction method, and this part is the same. We still call the query method to execute the SQL for us using the update. But if everything okay, then we will commit it. Okay, if we reach here, that means there is no query field, then we will commit it. But if there is any error when we are executing, right, we will go to the exception part and roll back the transactions. So this is the code. The rollback will be put under the catch part. But if there's no error when we execute the query, we'll proceed to commit the transaction. So this is a bit different from how we it depends on the program. If the program has multiple queries, it is safer to use the transaction method. So this is to show you the example how you can write it using the transaction. In the add part, I didn't. In the add part also, you can see the example. Also, we have written using modified it using the transaction. So we start the transaction, execute the query, and if no error, we will commit the query. If there is any error, then we will come to this part to roll back the transaction. So again, PDO, you remember to point to the assign the now value to it to release the connection. So this is for delete. Same thing for delete also. We rewrite this sample code, rewrite it into the transaction method. The PDO call the begin transaction function to start the transaction. we execute the query to delete it, commit it if no error. If there's any error, this part, the rollback function will be called to roll back the transaction, then free the resources. So the code is the same, but just the using the different API, we will write it using a different way. The functions we will call different functions. So if you in your assignment, right, if you all decided to use PDO, then you can refer to this example to prepare your config file. And this is a sample for the add, edit, and delete. So if you see these three folders, so I repeat again, the first folder, CRUD MySQLi, this is the one that we have written an example written using the MySQLi procedural approach. This is the one that have been modified using the prepared statement. You can see the prepared statement in the edit.php part. If you use prepared statement, then you have to have three subsets: prepare, bind, and execute. When we do the it's different from the MySQLi only if you are using prepared statement. So you can see the example here, and also the add.php also written using the prepared statement, the two examples. For the last one, this is the one that we use the PDO. So the benefit of PDO is it is database independent. That means that you not necessarily must use MySQL. If next time you are using different database, you can change the database name here. You can refer to the PHP manual for the PDO. If let's say you are interested to know more about the PDO, you can see we have the begin transaction here. So what are the methods that you can use, and what each method, what is if you want to know more, if you want to write the PDO in the prepared statement, this is the, you can refer here for the method that you can use. Okay, so this is the more details example that you can look at if you want to interested to use to have abstraction layers rather than fixed to the MySQL database. Okay, so this is the three examples that are main reference for you to see. If you notice that I also include another examples. There is also another example that you can see. This is an example that are related to allow you the programs that will allow to insert new record. Same thing, before you can run this code, you also need to set up the database. So if you look at the examples, right? Examples here, you need to you can check the what is the database and database name that we have used it. Let me. Okay, if you go to the testdb.php, so this is the script that I have written just to after you have set up the database, right? You can run it to test whether your database has been connected successfully or not. So if you click the testdb.php under the book PDO, so this is another example, another programs related to how this is actually programs that how they insert book, how they search the book using the which connect to the database one. So if you look at testdb.php, you will look at the config file, the sample config file here. This is one file that I used to do to check after you create the database, you can run this to double check whether the connection is working or not. Because the code, they will already embed all their database connection. They pass in, they straight away pass in instead of using the include the config file. So this is just to test the database. So from here you can see we need to create a new user called Bookkorama, and the DB name is books. So if you look at this Bookkorama SQL, we are before you can create this table, you have to first create a new database called books. So now I go to assist you again to set up the database. We need to create a new database called books. So you can check the code to testdb.php to get the database information. The DB name will be books. So we need to create a new DB called books. Now a new database has been created, and you can just copy my SQL to you can go to Bookorama to create this table, to copy this SQL statement to create table. Come to the console. You can paste here. So after you, okay. So now I have pasted the all the create table SQL statements here. You can press Ctrl Enter to execute query. Okay, if you click here, you will refresh the database, and you can see these tables has been created. This is already created using the query. So after you have created the tables, there is a insert SQL. You can also, again, you can copy all this. This will help us to insert some sample record here, so that you already have some data here that you can use to run the program. So later you can see the program and you can search. Okay, so for you to set up the database with some records, you can use the insert statement to execute it and to add some data into the database. So at the moment, all the database is empty. You can see from here, actually each one of these is empty at the moment. Okay, so there's no record here. Now after I clear this, I clear the console again, and this is the insert statements that I copy from the book insert.sql. And to run it, you click Ctrl Enter. So the new records will be added. So now if you click the tables again, you can see there are some records being added. Teach yourself Gym, Java 2. So this is the books review table with 1 review, customers table with 3 records, orders table with 4 sample records, order items with 4 sample records. So after you have set up this, then you can try to run the program to look at how it works. So if you click this example book PDO, these are the you can look at. If you want to look at the search, so you can run the program to search a book by title or by, there are a few options you can choose. You can choose to search by author, title, ISBN. Okay, so let's say now I want to search for the Java book. I search by title and I click in Java. Hold on, let me see. Oh yeah, I haven't created the user, so that's why the database cannot be connected. So after we create after you insert the records, the next thing we have to do is we have to create the user with the username Bookorama and password Bookorama123. So I need to create the user first, if not I can't connect to the database. So after we set up the database, we go to privileges. And now I want to create a new user. Click the add user account. The username and the username Bukorama 123. Choose localhost. Okay, so again, to save my time, I check all to give all the privilege and create the account by clicking go. So now a new user account Bukorama has been created to and has access to database books. And if now I do the use the search function again, I will be able to connect to the database. Okay, so now the records, we can see the record because the user account has been created and the connection can be established successfully. You can also run this after you set up the database. Before you run the program, you can actually run this testdb.php to make sure that the database connected successfully. So if there is any error like what we have seen just now, then we will be able to see. Okay, so this is the example to search result. And again, you can see here, this is the HTML page with the form that allow us to choose the type of the what we want to search by author, by title, or by ISBN, and the search term will be a text input. So when the user click the submit button, this will link us to results.php file using the post method. So the file that will process the script is results.php. If we come here, results.php. So this is to show us the example how we can create the variables, how okay, so this is for searching. So when we use modulus, that means that they will search anything that have passed by the user. So the search type will be exactly same like the name here in the select, the drop down list. Okay, so this is so we will these are the if else statement, the switch statement to help us to do the checking of for the searching. So you can refer to this. This is an example for you to refer how to do the search. So the other parts will be same. So this will be the step 1 to start the database collection. Step 2, handle the error, to execute the query using the prepared statement. So you can see that besides the basic one will be prepare, bind, execute. You can also use another method, store result, to store the result and bind the result. So they are another tool that you can use in the prepared statement, the store results and bind result. So this is for the processing. We can decide how in this example we will print when we search it. Search Java, so it will show us in this format. So this is appear here based on how we want to process and shows the response to the user at the UI side. Remember to free the result, and also because we use the bind result here. So instead of close the statement, we have to use the free result function. So if we don't have these two, we execute it, then here we will use the close function. But if you use the store result, bind result, then you have to use free result here. Okay, so this is also another example for the search. Okay, this is another example. If you want to see the example using PDO, written using PDO, right? Then you open the search. It's the same thing, but written using the PDO. The code will be written using PDO. So it's the same thing. Like let's say now we have author. Let's see what are the authors here. Okay, I put Michael. We search by author. Then we get this book, the number of books found. So you can see here, this will be, they will if you open the search PDO, you have to refer to results underscore PDO, and the code will be written using the API, using PDO API. So this is the connection link, the new PDO object that we create. So if a new PDO object, we will pass in the connection information, username and password. Okay, this one the examples how they use the prepared statement. Okay, the PDO. So this is the example using PDO. So you notice that if you want to, there is a row count function has been used here to calculate how many records has been found. So from the statement, right, we can actually call the row count function to check how many records has been retrieved when we execute it. So if let's say there are more than one, so if let's say I put there are 3 records found because the author with n. So there are 3 records. So we will see the numbers. The count will be equals to 3 when they how many rows has been found, and we use the loop to print out each of the record. So this is they also have an insert example to insert a new book. So you can also look at this. Actually, the example is similar to what you have seen in the previous example, but this is in the books context. So if you open the insert book, and this is the new book.html. So this will allow us to enter a new book. You can write in it. Okay, book inserted into the database. If you come to go to your database and refresh it, you will see a new record has been added. So if you look at this, the code newbook.html, you can check which is the file that will do the processing. This insert underscore book.php will be the file that will do the processing, and data will be sent to the backend using the post method. So this the code is similar to what you have seen, but because since they don't have the config file, right, so every time they have to include the database information, and if they have to change, if we don't have a separate config file, one of the problem is if you make any changes to the database, right, you have to change to every script. So my advice is it is better for you to follow the other examples, write a separate config file and include it in the PHP files that need to run the database. This will be a more convenient way rather than adding the database connection, the step 1 and step 2 into every file. It's easier to just include the config file. Okay, so this is the examples that I have shared with you for this week lecture. So you can set up, so before you try the lab exercises, try to go through the examples, set up the database and go through the examples before you do the lab exercise. The lab exercise questions already posted the lab exercise on Spectrum. Okay, so if you have any questions that you are not clear, you can ask me. You can send an email to ask me. If you are anything not clear or you want me to, is anything that you couldn't find online, you are still not clear after reading some online resources, you can send an email to ask me. I can reply to you. Okay, this will be the end of the recording, and it's just a short demonstration to show you how it works for working with database.